I'll turn it over to John. John's been a ham, I don't know,
a little over 10 years.
And I met John way back at the beginning when I was first starting back into ham radio myself. Very fascinating. He's on the board of the Twin City DX Association, avid DXer, loves all things technical. So welcome to John. Thanks.
Thank you. So this is not a rehearsed presentation. I've never done this before. So I'm just going to kind of step you through my thought process and how I got to where I am in the hobby, specifically with this particular way of operating in this station. And so I really appreciate everybody's attention today and coming in to see this. It does seem to be a really fascinating topic when people hear that you're operating remotely. People seem to have a lot of questions about how do you do this, how do you do that. We've already heard some of the questions, and I love talking about it because for me it's the way that I operate 100% of the time because I have no choice. Unless I wanted to put an antenna in my attic or activate my gutters or any number of ways that innovative hams figure out a way to get around an HOA. So with that, I'll have plenty of time for questions at the end, but feel free to raise your hand as we go along here. Basically what I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about my old station, my new station, and I'm just going to kind of take you from the antenna back all the way down to the microphone as I kind of take you through how we did this. I've had a lot of help. Denny, K0TT, many of you may know him from the TCDXA. He's a avid tower climber, very hard to get on your calendar. He's very much in high demand, and he helped me a ton. And my son, Mark, who is an electrical engineer, helped me a ton with the internet side of things. So I'll kind of talk about that a little bit, but I'm a financial planner by trade, so I'm not a technical person. I'm not an engineer. I wasn't in the military. You know, I don't have any kind of radio background. I've just always been super fascinated with radios, anything radio. My first career out of college was I got in the cell phone business back when nobody had them. So a lot of celebrities and business leaders and people that work at the TV stations, the radio stations, in medicine, real estate, I sold them all their first car phones way back in the late 80s, early 90s. That was kind of my first. And after all, it's just the radio, right? And that's what attracted me to that industry, was another use of the radio. So with that, let me just kind of jump into my first station. The winter of 2013, 2014, the snow came really early, and we got snowed in really fast, and I just decided this is finally, you know, after being in radios and as a hobby my whole life, I'm going to finally get around to getting my license. And so I got the ham program that you get for your laptop, and I studied. I went 0 to extra in about 100 days. And then that spring, I started with my first station, which was just a 7600 and a wire between a couple trees and a power supply and a desktop mic. And that was in our house in Minnetonka, where there was no covenants or HOAs or restrictions that I knew of, at least. I just put my tower up and figured I'd apologize later if I broke some sort of regulation. But I had a 50-foot tower basically on the back of the house. And I ultimately, the last iteration of that station, as you can see here, was a 7610, a PW1, a stepper urban beam, so a little bit smaller antenna for an urban or suburban neighborhood. Really cool antenna. I had a vertical and a wire. And I was on the radio at least 2-3 times a week. Loved chasing DX. But when I got into the hobby, late 13, early 14, we were kind of on the backside of the last solar cycle. So as I started getting going with HF, things were getting worse and worse and worse. So it got harder and harder and harder to add to your DXCC score. Fast forward to 2021. There's the backyard. That's our old house. That's a 43-foot vertical, a hex beam, and a 200-foot doublet. Kind of showing you a little bit of the detail of the vertical. 44 radials, 2,000 feet of wire underneath the grass. There's the urban beam.
Who did all the radios?
What's that?
Who did all the radios?
I did, and my son and my daughters. We use those little biodegradable staples that DX Engineering sells, and just laid them all out, went as far in every direction as I could. I took one long wire and put a rock on the end of it and threw it into the lake. So The Urban Beam was a really good antenna. I had it for 6 months. And then our kids are all grown. They're off the payroll, as they say. My youngest is 26 almost. And so we moved to a townhome in Eden Prairie in a new neighborhood. And I was reading the HOA document. The realtor said, oh, yeah, don't worry. I'm sure the builder will let you have an antenna. Right? To get me to sign. Oh, just in case, can I just get a copy of the HOA covenants? And sure enough, except with prior written approval of the Architectural Control Committee, no exterior television, radio, satellite, blah, 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 of any sort. I'm actually on the board for our HOA. I love our HOA. Obviously, I don't love this part of it, but I get it. And I knew about it going into it. Everybody hates HOAs in the hobby. I don't. Because unless one gets foisted upon you after the fact, right, it's something that, at least in my case, I knew about it going into the deal. And I just figured, I had talked to so many people over the years that had operated remotely. I just figured I'll get on the air in the next couple of years again somehow, and I'll we have a cabin up north, and maybe it'll work out that way. So in the interim, I bought a 7300 and threw a wire up in the trees next to the pole shed across from our cabin up north, and this was my whole station for a while, for about 18 months, while I tried to figure out what I really wanted to do ultimately to get back on the air and take advantage of this current solar cycle, as it's been great these last 3 years. So this was back in 2021. So I started making a list of equipment to specify. I knew the radio I wanted, I knew the amp, I knew the tuner, the antenna, the tower. The only thing I didn't know is, how do I get this all on the internet? How do I build a network? How do I support it for the remote side? And basically what I did is I asked my son to help me there, and I basically gave him my credit card and started seeing the total ramping up. So, and you have to remember too that this was like right in the middle of COVID, where supply chain issues were very much still a problem. Getting anything, I looked at getting an OptiBeam, but they're saying, well, you can get that one in a year if you're lucky, right? So I went with a Mosley Pro 67 C3. A lot of people have Mosleys. I'm sure a lot of people have had great luck with them. I did not. I only had it for a year. It had a bad trap, or 2 bad traps, or 4 bad traps. We kept taking it apart and sending them parts, and finally it was getting into the summer. And when your tower guy is 3 hours away, and winter's coming, and he doesn't climb towers in the winter, and Mosley's saying, well, just send us some more parts one more time, and we'll analyze it. I just said, you know what? I'm done with you guys. We're going to take it down. I'm going to get it through the winter with the tuner, and that's when I ordered the JK-XR7, which is my second antenna. So I've been back on the air for 3 years. I'm already on my second antenna. The JK, is everybody familiar with the JK brand? JK bought Force 12. So you've all heard of Force 12, I imagine. This used to be called the XBA JK Force 12 antenna. And they're based out of, I think, Connecticut. And this antenna covers 40 meters through 6 meters as long as you buy the 6-meter kit. It doesn't cover 30 meters, but I don't really do anything with that. And most importantly, no moving parts, no traps. And it's worked awesome now for 2 seasons. Orion rotor. Danny fashioned a little rubber umbrella for it because sometimes this particular rotor has a history of water getting in on the top. The new design doesn't do that apparently, but Danny said, well, just in case, I'm going to put the little rubber umbrella on it anyways. So basically, we dug a hole, poured 12,000 square feet of concrete. The antenna arrived on the tower arrived on a flatbed. 2 guys drove it from California directly, stopping for food and sleep or whatever. You can imagine what the shipping bill was for that. This is a 72-foot crank-up, tilt-over tower. It's motorized up and down and hand-cranked to tilt it over. So I'll be 60 in February, and I've never climbed a tower. I'm not going to start now. So I decided if I can bring it down 21 feet, maybe I can climb that if I need to do something easy. Otherwise, I'm calling Denny. And he's a little older than me, so definitely wanted something that could allow us to maintain it ourselves as much as possible. It's remote capable. Now, when they say remote capable, They mean you can have a cord that goes into your building and you can control it from there versus walking out to the tower and flipping a switch. All right? But it's a $5,000 option. And, of course, I snapped that up. And I'll get back to that in a second. But so I do have that option as part of the setup. So my landscaper came over and strapped up the tower, attached it to the base. You can see I had to remove quite a few trees. I still have firewood left over from that. I'll probably have 2 years left of that because they're mostly oaks. And we got it up and running, tested the tower. So where is this site? So that's my pickup and that's my shed. It's a 24 by 48 foot pole shed. It is not climate controlled. It's not particularly fortified against critters either. And it's across the street from our cabin on Bay Lake. There's a view with my drone. There's the inside, just to get you an idea what an inside of a pole shed looks like. It's nothing fancy. No climate control obviously poses some issues. Heat in the summer, the thing gets really hot in there in the summer. And in the winter, it's as cold in there as it is anywhere outside. I'll tell you how I kind of dealt with that. However, it does have a separate power account, and I had internet installed out there too. Instead of trying to do some sort of wireless link to the cabin across the street or dig under the road and run cable, I just had Spectrum come out and put another site across the street in the pole shed. Yeah. So, do you know where? Well, you know where Brainerd is. Brainerd, and you know where Lake Mille Lacs is. So I'm kind of between those two, closer to Lake Mille Lacs. If you know where Garrison is, you're 5 minutes from my cabin. Does anybody know where Rutgers is on Bay Lake? I'm on the same lake as Rutgers. It's about 107 miles from here. Oh, that's good. That's a good idea. Thank you. So, despite the COVID-related, well, because of the COVID-related supply chain issues, things came slowly. The Mosley took the longest, the antenna. We were getting a little nervous because it was like late July and we didn't have really an update, and then it just showed up. So really, the antenna was the last thing to show up. I ordered the Flex 6400 with the automatic tuning unit option, which I never use because I have an external tuner. And I actually ordered 2 of them because word was if your Flex radio breaks and you send it in, it's going to be gone for a while because of the COVID-related shortage. And so I have an unused 6400 still in the box that I just keep the software updated and haven't had to use it yet. I bought the Flex Power Genius, which is the amplifier. It's a full legal power, full solid-state amplifier. And it's rather expensive, but it's also bulletproof. It's very heavy. And then the Flex Tuner Genius I ended up buying. You couldn't find one from Flex because they were all out of stock because of the COVID deal again. So I was talking to a guy on the radio down in Texas, and he goes, well, I have a stepper antenna and a Flex station, and I've got the Tuner Genius, and I've never used it because the antenna tunes itself. So if you're looking for one of those, and I ended up needing it because the Mosley was not resonant where it's supposed to be resonant, and so it required tuning. I ended up melting one of the traps that winter, just trying to lump along at 500 watts just to stay on the air and use the tuner and try to keep my power down until I figured out something in the spring, which of course was the JK. And then the Maestro C came just a few months ago, which is the control head. So when you look at, is anybody super familiar with Flex radios or not so much? So Flex has what used to be the 6000 series, now it's the 8000 series, but so if you buy a 6400, it's just like you see there. It's just a black box. There's no screen, there's a power button. And then the back looks like a normal HF radio, right? The 6400M has this front on it, basically. Okay? But I didn't need that because I'm never going to see. In fact, people ask me all the time, does your amp make a lot of noise? I don't know. I'm always 2 hours away from it. Right? Does the fan make noise? I don't know. Don't care. So basically what the Maestro is you take the front of the 6400M and slice it off, and that's what you have. And on the back, it's got direct line for Ethernet, or right now, of course, it's operating off Wi-Fi using my hotspot here. And so you either can use it as in smart control mode, where you're using the laptop screen for what you saw on the screen before, which I'll show you again. And then this just ends up being all your knobs and dials, right? Or you can make this the radio, and then this becomes your pan adapter. So you can put it in one of those two modes. So it's kind of cool. Because you do have to kind of used to clicking and pointing if you're operating a Flex on a computer. You don't have knobs and dials. So this was literally, I had a screen set up. I plugged the radio in, downloaded the software, connected everything to the internet, and I was on the air within 2 minutes. That's how functional Flex is as far as getting you on the air remotely. It's pretty amazing. So you can see the interface, as you saw before. It's, if I hit the tune button, you can see I can operate the amp here. You can kind of see it's not a normal way of. I mean, if I was on the air right now, I would have this desktop mic plugged into the laptop, and I can control my whole station right from this laptop. But you can see it shows you what the amp's doing, what the radio's output is. The Mox button is Flex's version of push to talk. Okay. I've got the ATU bypassed because I have a Tuner Genius. And you adjust your gain, you tell it what mic you're using. Turn the amp off. Smart Link means I'm connected to the network. If you look down here, you see that little MS 31 milliseconds? Does everybody know what latency means in the internet world? Basically delay. So that's the delay between my station and this laptop, 107 miles away. It's imperceptible, right? There's other devices that allow you to operate certain radios remotely, but in my experience, they all have a tremendous amount of delay beyond 32 milliseconds. So as soon as I hit my push to talk button, and you start talking, they start hearing you on the air, pretty much. There's no waiting for me to come back to them. And it takes a little bit of getting used to. So this is what the rack looks like up north. If I can come around here without getting in trouble here. So the red striped box is the PC. The little black box next to it is the temp sensor. So I can see what the temperature and humidity is inside the rack remotely. The screen is a screen. I have a desktop mic. There's a keyboard up there. The next couple of items, the black item and the silver item, that's network equipment. Okay. The blue device is the data probe power distribution unit. So to show you what that looks like, I've got that pulled up right now. Right here. You see that? So if I hit this button right here, it shuts down my whole station. If I hit this button here, it launches it. And I can program which order and what delay there is between it activating these plugs on the back of that blue unit right here. Okay, so that's the front of it. The back of it, there's 8 plugs on the back, and then everything's plugged in, right? But this is how like right now, if I hit that and hit on, I just turned on the cooling fans up north. If it was 85 degrees out and I can see the temperature of the amp getting up there, I could turn the fans on and bring it down a little bit. Okay, so I just turned the fans on. So this is the radio. This is the amp, power supply. This is the UPS system. I learned the hard way that I needed a UPS system because that little PC up there was in the middle of a Windows update. Window before last, when we had that huge snowstorm, we had all the power outages up north. My power was out like for 2.5 days, which isn't a problem for me. I'm not on the air, but it doesn't damage anything unless the power goes out in the middle of a Windows update, which is exactly what happened. So I could not access my station. So I had to drive up there, grab the PC, rebuild it, drive back up, hook it all up, and what I decided to do is spend more money, right? $800 UPS system. So what happens now is if the power's cut, at least the computer will run for 5 more minutes waiting for the power to get restored, and if it doesn't, the computer knows to shut itself down, right? Because the rest of the station is shut down because that's not on the UPS. It doesn't need to be. And then when the power's restored, the system knows, reboot the computer, then I'll be able to log in, go to that dashboard you saw, ramp up my station. Takes about 3 minutes for my station to go from everything shut off to everything operating and up and running. Any questions on that so far?
What do you feel the safe temperature is? Like when do you turn your fan on?
I haven't ever gotten close to anything overheating, so I'm just proactive about it. The thing I watch the most is the amp, but I also have the ability, like if I go, let me go here. Temp stick. Here's the temp stick. So I log into that little device you saw. I also have a weather station up there so I can see what the wind speed is, and it's kind of taking its time here.
Do you have any automation to lower the tower automatically?
Not yet. I'm getting to that. That's coming. Well, that's not looking like it wants to log into that right now. Well, I might come back to that. So down here, that's the tuner. And this is the rotor control box. That's a green heron rotor control box, which also allows me to access it remotely. So you see on the screen there, you can see the big compass for the tower direction that it's turning. And you see these other interfaces here, right? That's the screen up north at the station, right? This is that screen right now live via Google Chrome remote. You can see I'm pointed towards Europe. If I go here and I want to point to Florida, the southeast, hit the button, watch. My tower, 107 miles away, is turning to Florida right now. So here's the Maestro. Kind of explain that. That's just a close-up picture of it. That's the day I got it. There it is next to my laptop operating in smart control mode. So I'm operating the PAN adapter and the smart SDR software on the laptop, and then I've got this sitting next to it to give me the normal knobs and dials that you have on a radio. I brought that to show everybody the case for it. So the internet connectivity is a big deal because a couple reasons. First of all, obviously, I got to connect to it. I got to have good, clean internet, low latency internet. But also, when you connect an internet wire to your radio, what are you also exposing your radio to potentially? RFI. What else? Lightning. Exactly. So I haven't had a lightning strike. I've had one 1 mile away many times because I have a lightning detector up there too, which buzzes my watch, buzzes my phone, wakes me up in the middle of the night. Oh, there's lightning up at the station, so I can shut my station down. Well, that doesn't protect your station against lightning. Sort of it does in my case because, I'll show you in a minute, when I shut my station down, both antennas are grounded automatically. So, but the other thing about the internet is that when you're having a problem with your internet at home, and like a lot of your devices are acting up, what do you tend to want to do to your internet at home? Exactly. Well, how do I do that? Remotely, over the internet. But then you'd lose control because now you're not connected. So if you tell the internet to shut itself down, right? Well, one cool thing about the PDU is that you can tell it to shut the power off to the network switch and the LAN, and then turn it back on 30 seconds later. So I'll hit those buttons, I lose connection, and then do this, and this, right? Go get some coffee or a beer, and then 5 minutes later, everything starts coming back online again. It's a little nerve-wracking the first time you do it. Not that a 2-hour drive is the worst thing in the world, but to do something that takes 5 seconds, it's a little tedious. So that's how we got around that.
So you've had to drive up there once to fix the computer issue?
That's it.
That's the only
In
time?
3 years.
That's great.
Thank you to my son, Mark, who is an electrical engineer. Oh, that's not what I want to do. Let me go here. All right.
How do you reboot the PDU?
I think the PDU has its own function you can tell to reboot itself as well. Luckily, that hasn't had to happen. I did have the PDU get a software firmware. That was another time I had to drive up, actually. It was kind of related to the same event, though, so maybe I don't count it twice. But it got corrupted. So I went to Walmart and I bought one of those 8-unit Wi-Fi enabled plug-in power strips where you just have an app on your phone. And truth be told, it works just as well as the $800 PDU. So you don't have to. Not everything was necessary, but you can't create macros and all that other stuff, and it's not hardened and heavy duty. But so I had to send the PDU into DataProbe to have them rebuild it under warranty. Sent it back to me. It was gone for like a month, but the $50 Walmart plug worked virtually as well, and I just turned everything on and did it on my phone. So what this is just showing you that I do have Wi-Fi in the shed, but none of my radio equipment runs on Wi-Fi. Everything's hardwired. The Wi-Fi is for the alarm system, the cameras, the temp stick, all the other peripheral devices. And my son built a separate network box for the networking equipment that isn't dedicated to the radio to keep them isolated and separate. So that's what that is. So here we are putting the rack together for the first time in the shed. You can see how unprotected it would normally be, right, inside a big shed. There's the data probe, front and back, rack mounted. I showed you that, right? I just want to show you this for fun because I don't ever want to have to undo this, ever. You can't even see the whole thing. I mean, this is the back of the rack. And believe it or not, every single cord has a what on it? Exactly. Yes. I bought a few dozen of those little suckers. Let's talk a little bit about climate control because Minnesota gets really cold and gets really hot. So I'm skipping ahead a little bit here, but this is the inside of a 4x4 metal shed that resides inside the 24x48 pole shed. And so we just ordered it online with MnARTS, or I don't know who it was online. And the shed came in this big box, and we put it together. And so we have this little 4x4 shed sitting on a big thick piece of plywood inside the shed, and then it's closed and locked to give it extra security, keep the critters out, so that there's just a hole in the back for all the cables to come through, and then I hang a little dryer sheet. You know those dryer sheet, you throw them in the dryer. I hung one of those over the hole with a little magnetic metal clip, because mice hate that stuff. So there's like a little curtain there, so if a mouse comes up the cord, they smell that and they go the other way. But this is plugged in to one of the plugs on the back of the PDU, and it also has a temperature sensor that if it's below 35 degrees, it turns itself off too. But in the summer, I can run this fan. So on one side, up on the upper side of inside the shed, I have this fan, and on the other side of the shed, I have a furnace filter with a square hole cut through, and it's clamped on there, and so it sucks cold air off the floor of the shed up through the rack and then out through this fan. So that's how we decided to be proactive about heat. Here's how we decided to be proactive about cold. So I called Flex Radio. I'm like, well, in my shed, it's going to get 25, 30 degrees below zero maybe someday, right? Is that a problem? They're like, well, is it a problem for the radio in your car? I'm like, well, no. It's not a problem for our radios either. Where it is a problem is for the UPS system, because the UPS system has a liquid battery in it. And they say, do not run this thing below 32 degrees. I'm like, well, they're being extra cautious, I'm sure, because it's an acid battery. But so what I did was, and this was Mike at Flex Radio. He's kind of the face and voice and, of Flex Radio on YouTube, and he's kind of their talking head, so to speak. I emailed him, and I said, what are people doing for this? And he said, well, what they're doing is they're buying this reptile pad. So it's a pad that's, like yay big, right? It's got an adhesive backing. You just pull the thing off. I stuck it on the bottom of the UPS system with a 55-degree thermostat, so it keeps it at 55 degrees, so that the batteries inside there don't freeze. So lightning protection, let's talk about that, because what's the best form of lightning protection known to ham radio operators is to disconnect your antenna and throw it out the window, right? Wouldn't that be great? I have seen remote operating stations where they've actually got robotic arms that, they'll have a row of their coaxes on a robotic arm, and they'll have an arm that pulls it away and pulls them out and then puts them back in when they want. Maybe I'll do that someday, but I only have 2 antennas. So basically what I did is I just made sure to ground the heck out of, ground and bond everything. So everything, the shed is grounded. There's a surge protector in the shed that protects the whole shed. I had an electrician install that. Every single cord that comes in from the outside, I've figured out some form of isolation, even the cable internet connector. The Ethernet cords, Flex radios are particularly sensitive to RFI, or not RFI, but a power surge that would come over your Ethernet cord and go right into the back of the radio, right? So another ham that down in Indiana that I talked to said, what I did is I bought these little fiber optic isolators. And so the Ethernet goes in one end, there's a fiber optic junction, and then the Ethernet comes out the other end. And so the energy can't jump the light beam. And that's how you isolate Ethernet for lightning. And you've all seen these, right? DX Engineering sells them. They're $200. They're a multi-wire lightning protection. So I use this for the rotor and tower remote cables. So I have 2 of them right now. This is the device that grounds the antennas. So when power is applied to it, the antennas are connected. When power is cut, they're grounded. Is it ideal? Because lightning could jump inside that box, right? Obviously. Is it ideal? No. But it's the best you can do without physically disconnecting your antennas, your antenna cables. Any questions on that so far? That's the surge protector in the sheds. All right, so here's Chrome Remote Desktop. I'll show you that live. So when I'm operating, so I have another screen that I keep with me that plugs into the laptop, and it'll sit next, and I'll have the Chrome Remote Desktop on this screen, and I'll have the pan adapter on the either laptop or on this. Point being is, it gives me some data on what's going on with the other devices. The way that I control, and this was from Flex Radio too, the Flex Radio tells you to just operate your radio remotely. Don't try to feed all these devices to your current position. The way to accomplish that is to act as if everything else is like you're standing there, up there, and then just have the radio on our network or your network, right? So the way that I do that is, again, with Chrome Remote Desktop. So this is the interface for the amp, which I just turned on. This is the interface for the tuner, which I just turned on. I just tuned. Okay? But this is the screen up north. I showed you how I turn the antenna, right? This is the data stream from the rotor control. So if I can kind of see what's going on and who's connecting. You know, I can see if someone else were to somehow hack in up there and start turning my antenna.
I tried.
Yeah. And then this is an app called FR Stack for the Flex radio equipment. So you can see it's kind of a band stack register, whatever you call it. And it gives you some additional diagnostics on your radio up there. Allows you to reboot the radio without being there to push the button on it. And gives you some other diagnostics and things for the radio. So basically, everything else, you turn your amp on once, and then when you're done, you turn it off. I don't have to tune very often because the tuner memorizes all the frequencies you've been on. So after a while, it just goes where you've been, right? And the same with the rotor. You tune it here and there. You don't need to have it always connected to your computer on this end. So this works really well, and it's completely seamless and instantaneous. It's as if that PC were sitting right here. And you saw how quick I can make that happen.
So would it be accurate to say that you rarely operate from the shed itself? You operate from the cabin the same way you do at home?
Exactly. So I always say when I'm on the air, I'm either 100 yards away or 100 miles away. Exactly. So I'll be across the street. I'll show you that too. So this is just a still shot, basically of this in case I wasn't able to connect. So the pan adapter is amazing in the Flex technology. I mean, you can zoom in as much as you want, pretty much. You can zoom out. So that's segment, that's band. So you can see all the FT8 going on down there. So these are the apps that control. When you have a logging program or an audio device like an FT8 interface like WSJTX or that kind of thing, you normally connect those to your radio with a wire, right? Or a cord or something, or they find each other over the internet. Well, what if you're trying to do FT8, or what if you're trying to do your logging on this end? So that's the one thing that I do have on this end is my logging program. And when you boot up your radio, these two apps come up as well, and they also connect to the radio. What CAT does is it sends frequency information to your logging program, like a cord would, only it's Flex's wireless over the internet type interface, and DAX sends audio, so that you can have your WSJTX key your radio, I think with CAT, and send the audio with DAX. Right? So sending the tones and hearing them coming back, right? And translating them. So that's how they got around that, basically. A little bit about the audio. As I said, I'm coming from the antenna all the way to the microphone, right? So some of the devices that I use. So I use this. This plugs in right to the back of the Maestro. The MOX button's right there. And other than having some sort of device to be able to see the other screen so I can see what my rotor and my tuner and my amp are doing, I can operate with this device and this headphone and then some other screen. I can even look at it on my phone. So if I want to access Chrome Remote Desktop, I can do it on my phone, I can do it on my iPad, I can do it on virtually any device. And it's a little harder on the phone because to turn the rotor, you're like, going like this. But it's kind of fun when people come over and say, well, what is that thing? What's that big thing in the air, Like, let me show you something. And it starts turning. And I'm standing there with my phone. So I use a Radio Sport headset. I have a Blue Yeti, which is a podcast microphone on a boom here in Eden Prairie. And then, funny enough, I've discovered that this cheap piece of whatever, $13 on Amazon, this thing sounds awesome on a Flex radio. I'm telling you that because that's what people say. Wow, your mic sounds awesome. I'm like, what is it? I'm like, you don't want to know. I mean, I always say that Flex radios can make a can with a string sound good. All right. There's the Blue Yeti. There's the microphone. This is another great solution. $80 gaming headset. Works great. Plugged into the laptop. So my next project, which isn't done yet, is, so what you're looking at right here, this is the junction box on the side of the tower that controls the motors and the limit switches that stop the tower from going up too far, which would be very bad, and stop the tower from going down as well. And the way that they are controlled right now is I have to walk up to the tower, open my little fence I have around it, flip a switch, there's a 5-second delay, and the motor starts sending it up, and then the limit switch stops it, flip it the other way, 5 seconds later, the motor starts bringing it down, hits the limit switch, and stops it, right? Sounds awesome, except for what if one of your limit switches gets corroded, and it's the one that keeps it from going up too far, and it happens, luckily, while you're standing right there. This actually happened. Because when the tower was sitting on its side for 30 days before we got the concrete cured, it didn't occur to me that the tower is not designed to sit on its side as far as water disposition goes, right? So water got inside one of my limit switches, and so at one point I was watching the tower go up, and I saw where it's supposed to stop, and it kept going about 6 more inches, and I quick flipped it, called U.S. Tower, and they're like, well, it would have jammed, it wouldn't have torn itself apart or anything like that, but if it jams, it's not a good thing because somebody's got to climb that thing and jiggle it, or, you know. So I replaced the limit switch, and so it made me a little nervous about operating my tower remotely, obviously, because now it's not going to happen again because it's sitting the right way now and all that, but it would be kind of cool, right, if you're down here in the city and there's a severe storm warning going on, and you can see this purple mass coming right to your tower on radar, right? To be able to, from down here, flip a switch, and my tower would go from 75 feet down to 24, right? And get out of harm's way. That's my next project. Funny enough, quick story. So I'm telling my son this. How are we going to do this, right? I know what I want. You know what to do, I hope, and I'll pay for it. And I'll even pay for your plane tickets to come up here from Chicago and help me with this. So I'm having this conversation on the phone with him this summer, planning this project with him, right? And I get a severe a tornado warning on my phone for Bay Lake while I'm on the phone with him. Well, the webcam for Bay Lake is on my property. So I flip that on. I can see the funnel cloud. I'm like, too late, Mark. Scratch that, because there's a tornado heading right to my station right now. Turns out it went like 3 miles north of us, but it just missed us. You might have seen some of the network coverage down here, or the TV coverage of, you know, that motorhome trip. You know, there's motorhomes that were, that was like a 5-minute drive from my place. I've had 2 tornadoes since we built this, since we bought this cabin. One went 3 miles south of me, one went 3 miles north of me so far, and that's just in 5 years of owning the cabin. So the trick is that we have to figure out a system of relays that will have some logic involved. This is the inside of the box inside the shed that controls the box on top on the side of the tower. So this is their idea of a remote control, tower control, is a cord that is 100 feet long. But I want to be able to do it from down here. So my son has devised a system of relays and logic for about $300. Not super expensive. You guys that like to make stuff would really be, I think, fascinated by this apparatus because, you know, he bought a box, he bought the relays, we've been testing it, and then we ran out of time. So we're gonna pick up where we left off when he's back in town for Thanksgiving. I'm not too worried about winter. It's really it storms in the summer. Luckily, the tower is surrounded by trees, and the wind always comes from this direction. And the way that our cabin sits on the lake, there's a 20-foot rise, and then the cabin's there, and so when the wind comes across the lake, it goes over the station. So we don't really, the highest wind I've ever recorded on my weather station is like 15 miles an hour, when there's been 65-mile-an-hour winds on the lake. So I think I'm safe, but what a cool project, right, to do with your son. And so I'm not really a maker like a lot of you guys are, but I have a son that knows how to translate my crazy ideas into parts and So that is my presentation. What questions do you have?
Can I
Yeah.
ask what it costs all said and done?
You really want to know?
I do. I know it's a rude question, and I'm sorry, but I do.
I'm approaching $100,000. The tower was $35,000 alone. But that's labor, that's the landscaper, that's all the parts, all the labor, plane tickets for my son. You know, I will say this. This is my lifetime dream station, right? So the beauty of ham radio is you don't have to spend a lot of money, right? I mean, you can have a remote station with Flex technology for a fraction of that cost. You didn't have, you could buy a $50 Wi-Fi plug instead of a $800 one, right? There's all kinds of ways that you can maybe cut some corners. You don't need to have a $35,000 tower. You could have a flex beam or a hex beam on a 30-foot pole and do just awesome, right? So my goal was to build a station that I could retire and operate for the next 20, 30 years and have nothing go wrong, hopefully. At least physically wrong with, antennas and towers and things like that. Radios are going to break and that kind of thing, but it is a lifelong dream station, and so I didn't really cut any corners. Yeah, for sure. Right. But people just, when you talk to people on the air, they're just so fascinated by this, and I don't know anything different now. I come home, have dinner, my wife goes work it out, and I go into my office in my house, flip everything on, put a headphone on. Within 5 minutes, I'm on the air talking around the world. We're doing FT8, and it's just like my radio station was in the basement, where it was a 7610 and a PW1, and everything was right there. But it's just as reliable. It's just as quick to get on the air. If it was an ordeal and you just want to be on the air for 15 minutes, you wouldn't. But because everything's so quick, I can get on the air for 15 minutes and then be done for the night or whatever. So I've always been so fascinated with anything that has to do with radios, and I love just the goodwill and the fun and hearing other people's stories about their station. And I was interviewed by QSO Today a while back because of the remote station, and that was really fun to do. And it's just been an awesome hobby, and all the friends that I've made, like Chuck and all you guys. And I mean, it's just a really, really awesome way to get on the air. And for people that are in an HOA or an apartment or in a nursing home, if you can find a plot of land somewhere in the boonies that you can get internet and power to, that 4-foot shed could just as easily be outside if it was weatherproof. I mean, it's literally all you need now. You can have a tower right next to it and a little shed on some farmer's land somewhere, as long as you can get internet and power to it, and you could have everything that I have. And that just is amazing to me.
So, one question. You didn't mention CW. I know you've got low
Yep.
latency internet, but there seems like there are some difficulties with some of these remote situations.
Right.
Exactly what sort of CW operation.
Right, and the issue is latency, right? Because CW is really quick, right? I don't do CW. I don't know how to do it. It's on my list someday. But that's why I have the Maestro, because that's for flex operators that are operating remotely. You really need to have the Maestro because it eliminates almost all the latency completely. And you plug your paddle right in the back, and you're doing it just like any other radio. Yeah, I mean, 30 to the most latency I have in Eden Prairie is about 60 milliseconds. When I'm across the street, it's 20. When I'm here right now, it was like 30 milliseconds. That is almost imperceptible to the human ear. What other questions?
You mentioned isolating your Ethernet cable from power surges using fiber optics.
Yep.
That means you have to install a fiber optic switch,
Right, exactly. I just showed you the device that goes in line, but there's a switch that, exactly. There's a little fiber optic switch, little teeny tiny little box, takes 9-volt DC or something like that, and just it's literally just covering, a 3-inch gap to break the circuit so that the power surge can't make it into your radio. So it was basically all summer. I mean, it was several weekends of, well, the concrete takes 30 days to cure. So that was like as soon as the weight restrictions came off the roads, so that was in May, we poured the concrete. That took us into June. Then radios started showing up. But then the tower showed up end of June, and then the antenna was making us nervous, and that showed up like end of July. And so in August, we finally got everything together. And you can imagine the sick feeling that I had working on this all summer. It's August now. Took us a weekend to put that Mosley antenna together, right? You get it up there, crank up the tower, extend it, hook up a radio quick to just see, and oh my God, 20 meters is like 2.8 SWR. And so you're calling Mosley. I mean, so it was kind of anticlimactic, to say the least, because the last thing that showed up was what we had an issue with. And Mosley, they tried to, but they just couldn't get it done with. And I think that the people that designed this antenna no longer work there, if you know what I mean. So it was really an unfortunate experience. So a friend of mine down in Rochester bought the Mosley. He had a Mosley antenna exactly like it, destroyed by a tornado, and he needed some parts. So I was able to sell the antenna for $1,200 for parts. So I got something back for it, but it's about a $3,700 antenna, so that wasn't awesome. So it was the JK, by the way. It was about $3,700. Question?
So do you notice a pretty significant difference in noise floor now that you have something else?
Well, that's a great question, because yes, the cool thing about, we all fight RFI these days when they're in a metro area or a suburban area, and it's becoming a problem for the hobby, for sure, and has been for a long time. And I had neighbors in Minnetonka that had a illegally installed cable system in their house, and so it wasn't grounded properly. So they'd turn their TV on at 8 o'clock at night. I'd have 5.9 plus 10 loud noise on all bands everywhere, because they were right next door to me. And so I used my little direction finding RFI thing. It's like, oh, yep, it's you. Knocked on their door. They're good friends, and told them what's going on. Can you help me out? No, not really interested. Well, you realize this is dangerous. If lightning strikes in the neighborhood, the lightning energy is going to go through your whole house. Everything that's connected to your cable, trying to find a ground, which is on the wrong end of your house, which is what's causing the RFI. Like, we don't care. I don't want to have anybody coming over here or digging up my yard or anything. So I had to call the cable company. And they called and said, well, if you don't fix this, we could get fined $20,000 by the federal government or whatever, because it's illegal, unsafe installation that some contractor did wrong. So we are going to disconnect your cable if you don't let us fix this. So they fixed it, noise went away, and now my neighbors weren't friends anymore, unfortunately. Point being is that was just one little issue that I had in Minnetonka. Transformers, everything like that. Up north, it's quiet. There's nothing around. Nobody cares how big my antenna is or how tall my tower is. It's in the woods across the street, and it's super quiet up there. And so that's another problem solved with remote operation, is if you can find some land in the country where you can just get internet and power, you can have a remote station really inexpensively, and you can escape RFI as well. Yeah, that was a big unexpected plus. Any other questions? Oh, yeah.
Have you noticed any difference between the stepper and your other antenna with traps and other privacies?
Well, this antenna it's 50 feet long, and it's 24, 26 feet wide, so it's a big antenna. So I was going to do the DB18E, is what I wanted to do ultimately. I've got another buddy up there on Lake Mille Lacs that's got one. He's had it up for 14 years, and the only problem he's had with it is one of the cable trusses broke, actually. It wasn't even the antenna that broke. And so, but I was still nervous about having an antenna with moving parts, and my antenna guy's 3-hour drive away and happening in the middle of winter and taking me off the air. And so the stepper I had doesn't really compare to it. The stepper that I had would compare to a hex beam because it's 2 elements on every band and then a rotating dipole on 40. And so I had the hex beam for 5 years, which covered 20 through 10, and then I used a wire or a vertical for 40. So I never really had a real direct comparison, but the urban beam I thought did just as well on 20 through 6 actually, because the stepper covers 6 too. Just as good as the hex beam I thought, and then did a little bit better on 40 meters because it was up higher with that rotatable dipole than my vertical on the ground or a big wire. And it was rotatable, so that's why I did it. I wanted to be able to at least have some sort of directionality on 40 meters. So really fun to put together. Not a cheap antenna. They're about $3,000 at least for the urban beam. But for someone that wants an antenna that covers all the bands pretty much 40 through 6 and is rotatable and isn't super complicated because it just has the 2 motors in it, it's a really good solution because it also doesn't present much of a visual profile over your house. I mean, you're not gonna piss off the neighbors or your wife as much. Any other questions? Oh, great question. I've tried it on an airplane. You can't transmit on an airplane, but I was listening. And so I had my iPad, and I was listening with my earbuds. And it was working pretty well, actually. I was in Hawaii a couple years ago at the pool on the Wi-Fi and made a contact with Vietnam, which got confirmed, and that was a new country for me on DXEC. It was pretty cool because if you think about it, I was connecting back to Minnesota over Wi-Fi, and then the signal was going back over my head to Vietnam. And I got it. It took a few tries. It was doing about 1,200 watts. And so that's probably, I was down in Rochester at the Mayo Clinic for a routine doctor's appointment in the hotel. Brought my headset and my laptop, and I had like 4 hours between 2 of my appointments, so I was on the radio there. So virtually anywhere that I have low latency Wi-Fi, I can operate seamlessly, pretty much.